Do you believe that when a neighborhood becomes too black, white residents quietly pack up and disappear? Not because of crime, not because of the economy, but simply because they no longer feel like they belong. This isn't 1960s America. This is 2025. And in this video, you'll discover 10 American cities that have become so black that white residents chose to retreat. But the real reason behind this exodus might just shock you. This video is for analytical and educational purposes only. It does not represent the views of any political group or organization. Let's approach this topic with objectivity and an open mind. Number 10. Jackson. When black presence renders a state capital invisible. If you believe a predominantly black city should be a point of pride and racial progress, Jackson, the capital of Mississippi, may give you pause. With over 80% of its population identifying as black, Jackson should stand as a shining example of historical transformation. Instead, it's become a city silently abandoned by those who once controlled and profited from it. This is no longer a trend. It's the legacy of white flight. Since the 1960s, white residents have steadily withdrawn from Jackson as if leaving a party where they were no longer the hosts. And they didn't just leave behind houses. They left the schools, infrastructure, and financial responsibility as well. Here's the cold truth. In 1980, white residents made up about 47% of Jackson's population. By 2020, that number had plummeted to just 16%. A silent, unannounced act of racial self-segregation. Meanwhile, Jackson worked to build its community. Black leadership took over the city government, but instead of being welcomed, they witnessed a wave of white residents fleeing to nearby areas like Madison and Rankin County. Places with new roads, clean water, and fewer black people. And just like that, a city rich in history and full of life was labeled chaotic. Not because it failed, but because it no longer served the cultural dominance of a white minority. Number 9. Atlanta. When being too black triggers a retreat. A strange paradox is unfolding in Atlanta. The more successful the city becomes, the more some residents choose to leave. Atlanta today is a beacon of black empowerment, not just because nearly 50% of its population is black, but because black individuals lead the city, from local government to businesses, arts, academia, and activism. You'll see a black mayor, black CEOs, and long lines outside black-owned brunch spots. Atlanta doesn't just include black culture. It belongs to it. But as black communities cease to be a minority and begin shaping the city's cultural identity, many white residents have started relocating to areas like Alpharetta and Marietta, often citing the familiar reason, looking for better schools, a coded way of saying they no longer feel at ease. Since 1970, the percentage of white residents has dropped from over 60% to just 38%, while the surrounding suburbs have boomed. Not because of economic hardship, but because some no longer wish to live in a place where they are no longer the cultural center. Number 8. Cleveland, Ohio. When the silence of a community becomes a citywide alarm. It doesn't take an earthquake or hurricane to bring a city to its knees. Sometimes, all it takes is a collective departure, quiet, but devastating. And Cleveland is the perfect example. Once a proud symbol of American industrial strength, Cleveland didn't collapse overnight. It unraveled migration by migration. Every time white residents packed up and left East Cleveland, they didn't just take their belongings. They took the budget, the schools, and the belief in the city's future. From 1970 to 2020, East Cleveland shifted from a majority white neighborhood to over 90% black. But this wasn't just demographic change, it was a strategic retreat. As black families started buying homes and enrolling their kids in public schools, white residents didn't argue. They simply left. They moved to places like Parma and Mentor, places with Trader Joe's, fewer cops, and just enough diversity to feel comfortable. But their departure didn't leave a void. It left behind a hollowed-out city, crumbling schools, fractured roads, major supermarkets replaced by corner stores behind bulletproof glass. And the harsh reality? Black residents didn't leave. They didn't have an escape hatch. They stayed, they adapted, and they fought back against a system that had abandoned them long ago. Cleveland isn't just a city. It's living proof that when privilege chooses to walk away, hope often walks out with it. Number 7. Newark, the city white America left and never looked back. Not all instances of white flight unfold the same way. In Newark, New Jersey, it wasn't just a migration, it was a clear declaration: we're gone, and we're not coming back. Unlike cities where falling property values eventually lure residents back, Newark witnessed a full-scale, unapologetic retreat, one that seems permanent. Before becoming a symbol of communities of color rising up, Newark was once a classic working-class city. Italian and Irish neighborhoods, local delis with sausage links in the window, churches on every corner. Then came the 1960s, bringing inequality, police brutality, and a fierce civil rights movement. The 1967 uprising was the breaking point, and it marked the moment white residents fled en masse, not because their homes were destroyed, but because their familiar social order was being challenged. By 1980, Newark had transformed. 50% black, 37% Latino, and white residents had dropped below 12%. They moved to places like Livingston or West Orange, places where they could still say, "I'm from New Jersey," without ever setting foot on Broad Street again. Newark didn't fail. It was systematically defunded, excluded from the media spotlight, and branded as a cautionary tale of urban decay. But beneath that label lies a resilient community, a city that gave the world Queen Latifah, Shaquille O'Neal, and some of the best Portuguese food north of Lisbon. Number 6. St. Louis, a city split in two by fear and prejudice. Sometimes, a map doesn't tell the whole story. In St. Louis, the dividing line isn't just on paper, it cuts through the city in real life, drawn by race, class, and psychological barriers. To the north, where over 46% of the population is black, the area carries deep historical roots and a spirit of resilience, despite being neglected for decades. On the other side, suburbs like St. Charles, Chesterfield, and Baldwin have become hotspots for white flight, where nearly 85% of the population is white. Ironically, St. Louis was once a thriving economic hub, but the city began to experience a mass retreat only after black residents began to gain political and economic power. The moment diversity stopped being a slogan and became a reality, the exodus began, not because the economy collapsed, but because some simply couldn't handle the changing color of their surroundings. Leave a comment. Hit like if you're here for truths that don't pull punches. And don't forget to subscribe, because the next 5 cities on this list get even more complicated. Let's keep going. Number 5. Chicago, a city where racial lines need no fences, just zip codes. Chicago isn't just divided, it was designed to be. For decades, racial stratification here hasn't been an accidental outcome. It's been the result of policies, prejudice, and fear, molded into an entire system. If you want to understand how far white flight has evolved, just step into neighborhoods like Englewood or North Lawndale. These were once stable, predominantly white communities with bustling local businesses. Now they're majority black neighborhoods, with reputations warped by media coverage. Today, Englewood is 94% black. North Lawndale is 85%. But don't be fooled. This isn't a natural demographic shift. It's the result of redlining, blockbusting, and predatory lending, systems that crushed economic opportunity and then blamed the victims. White residents started fleeing as early as the 1960s, leaving behind not just empty homes, but a legacy of underinvestment and an unspoken warning: this place is no longer for us. Worse still, the reputation of these neighborhoods now overshadows reality. The news often labels them as danger zones, but rarely mentions the families who've stayed for generations, the historic churches, or the tight-knit support networks that offer more protection than any police presence ever could. Chicago isn't just the windy city. It's a city where prejudice blows harder than any real storm. Number 4, Birmingham, where Martin Luther King's statue still stands, but tolerance does not. If any city deserved to symbolize integration and progress, it would be Birmingham, the birthplace of the American Civil Rights Movement. But the irony is stark. While monuments honoring history still tower over the city center, those who once held power have quietly slipped away. From 1970 to 2020, Birmingham's white population declined by more than 60%. Today, over 68% of the city's residents are black, not because white residents lost their jobs or homes, but because they lost control. As black leadership began to take hold, whether in government, policing, or public education, a renewed wave of white flight emerged. Not loud, not chaotic, but steady, like clockwork. They didn't flee across state lines, just far enough to feel safer. Suburban enclaves like Hoover, Vestavia Hills, and Mountain Brook became the new havens, complete with manicured lawns, boutique coffee shops, and a watered-down version of diversity that didn't feel too uncomfortable. But Birmingham didn't collapse. It's rising. Black-owned businesses are thriving. Cultural heritage centers are being restored. This city doesn't just have history. It has spirit, rhythm, and some of the best hot sauce-drenched Southern fried chicken you'll ever taste. Number 3, Baltimore, where leaving became a strange badge of honor. Some people leave quietly, but not in Baltimore. Here, some white residents don't just move away. They brag about it, like it's a status symbol. You'll hear it all the time. I work in Baltimore, but I live in Howard County. Translation? I make my living in a black city, but I choose a white life in the suburbs. Ever since the civil rights era of the 1960s, hundreds of thousands of white residents have gradually pulled out of Baltimore. From 1950 to 2020, the city lost over 350,000 white residents, while areas like Anne Arundel, Harford, and Howard County expanded with the promise of safer neighborhoods and better schools. But the reality? It's a racially coded redistribution of population and power. As the black population grew, now around 60%, the city's resources dwindled, schools deteriorated, budgets shrank, and the media rebranded Baltimore as a danger zone. The bitter irony? Baltimore birthed icons, from Thurgood Marshall, the first black Supreme Court justice, to Jada Pinkett Smith. Yet the very neighborhoods they came from are now portrayed as the consequence of too much blackness. The truth is, Baltimore didn't fall. It was defunded. But the community stayed, and they're rebuilding piece by piece with bare hands and unbreakable will. Number 2, Gary, Indiana, a city abandoned because of skin color? It wasn't a storm, nor an earthquake, but Gary, Indiana experienced a population collapse so extreme it stunned the nation. In less than a century, Gary shifted from being 90% white in 1960 to just 11% white today. Meanwhile, the black population now makes up more than 78%. This is no longer just a demographic shift. It's a racial exodus driven by invisible fears and deeply embedded prejudice in American society. Once a booming steel town, Gary had everything going for it: stable jobs, modern housing, and a thriving community. But when black workers began moving in, buying homes, and enrolling their children in schools, white residents quietly pulled away, not because of economic decline, but because diversity itself became uncomfortable. This retreat didn't just leave behind empty homes, it took with it investment, services, and hope. Today, Gary is often labeled a ghost town, but the truth is, it was never given a real chance to grow as a black city. The families who remained are still rebuilding their lives amidst the ruins, with a determination that the media rarely bothers to mention. Number 1, Detroit, a city rising from ashes, or proof of a calculated escape. Imagine a city that once symbolized American industrial pride, where over 85% of residents were white in the 1950s. Now, Detroit is one of the blackest major cities in America, with over 75% of the population identifying as black. But this isn't a story of organic diversity or social evolution. This is the painful aftermath of a racial engineering strategy. disguised as voluntary migration. During the Great Migration, hundreds of thousands of African Americans moved to Detroit seeking work in auto plants, Ford, Chrysler, General Motors, carrying with them the hope of the American dream. What met them was fear and resistance, redlining, blockbusting, and a massive white exodus to the suburbs. The breaking point? The 1967 uprising, labeled a riot by the media, but in truth it was the eruption of a community long suffocated. From that moment forward, Detroit was systematically abandoned, corporations pulled out, budgets were slashed, banks denied credit, and the media painted Detroit as a city that was dangerous and decaying. Meanwhile, suburbs like Livonia and Bloomfield Hills, where white residents fled, flourished, received investment, and were proudly deemed safe. The truth? Detroit didn't fail because it became black. It failed because it was drained, intentionally. But the story isn't over. Today, among the ruins, hundreds of new black-owned businesses are rising. Culture, music, and street art are making a fierce comeback, despite the headlines still calling it a dying city. The real question isn't why these cities collapsed. It's who chose to walk away when they were no longer in control. From Detroit to Gary, history wasn't just written by migration. It was shaped by fear, privilege, and the refusal to recognize the success of black communities. So what do you think? Did white residents leave because the cities changed color, or because they were no longer the center of it all? Leave a comment, hit like if you value hard truths, and subscribe to follow the rest of our series. 10 U.S. cities that became too black to stay, where we ask the questions others won't. We welcome all perspectives, shared with respect and a spirit of dialogue. See you in the next video.